Hello, everyone. Today we will talk about the state of Redis forks and alternatives. I did a presentation about this topic close to 2 years ago. Then Redis actually changed its license, and I thought that's a very good idea to update and see where things stand now in 2026, almost exactly 2 years later after Redis license change. Now, to remind you, Redis is still one of the most popular open source database system, right? It's is in a top 10, and if you look at the subset of a key value stores, right, then again by the same measure of DB engines, it's the top key value database. Now, before we go and look in the Redis alternatives, let's talk about some history, also known as Redis drama. Redis, for you who doesn't know a lot about this project, was started back in 2009, and it was licensed under a very permissive open source license called BSD. That means you could do anything you want with Redis. You could use it for any purpose. You could, modify it, make commercial versions, and whatever. It's very quickly overtook Memcached as a leading solution for caching and other key value and in-memory use cases. And also we saw the Amazon recognizing that, and Elastic Cache started supporting Redis in the cloud in September 2003. Now, if you look at Redis, the company, it's came kind of from the side. That's, I would say, unusual compared to many other companies like MySQL and MongoDB, Elastic. It was actually called first as Garantia Data, and it was launched in 2011. Its initial focus was on enterprise Redis. Then it changed name to Redis Labs in 2014, and with the rise of the cloud and database as a service, it was really refocusing on Redis in the cloud instead. And then finally in 2021, it drops that Labs part, and it's become simply known as Redis. Relationship between Redis founder and the Garantia Data was kind of interesting, because Garantia Data tried to change the name in 2013 to Redis DB, where Salvatore pushed back at that time because he found that to be confusing, and that was kind of resolved with Salvatore finally joins Redis Labs in 2015. Now, he still would own Redis itself, right, until he transferred the IP and Redis trademark to Redis Labs in 2018. And in 2020, Salvatore stepped down from Redis project, kind of making a promise to community what Redis will be open source forever. Now, Redis had always kind of a very interesting relationship, right? It attempts to somehow, like a twist open source. They were first to champion what was called like a commons clause addition to a license, basically making it non-open source license, right? And then that didn't quite work as they expected, with a lot of pushback. They relicensed Redis models on the source available license in 2019. And that was at that time connected with Salvatore and Redis App jointly promising to keep Redis itself, Redis core, not models, and open source forever. Well, forever didn't last that long, and in 2024, Redis changed the license to source available. Now, what is the goal of license change? Well, in this case, that was really classical, right? Most of all the database companies tend to be focused on the cloud and creating monopoly in database as a service, right? Redis wanted to make sure what Amazon cannot really run Redis in the cloud. And why is that important? Well, because obviously the database as a service is a state of art of simplicity for most developers, right? When you don't have to really have special skills and take responsibility for running the database, you can just have a cloud vendor running that for you. Then as developer, you are focusing on your application. Right, and that is something which caused many companies to fully or partially abandon open source licenses. Right, now you may ask, what is exactly the problem with that monopoly in a database as a service? Right, well, I still can go ahead and spin out the database myself, self-hosted. But the problem really is what that requires very, very different skill, right? I mean, running database yourself, it's akin to being able to, I don't know, let's say, put the car from a component, right? Where database as a service usage is just like riding a car, which is a very different skill. And most of the people those days, most of developers who are comfortable operating database as a service in the cloud are not going to be able to self-host the database for mission critical environments. So in this case, it really becomes no different from proprietary software if monopoly is maintained. And of course, when monopoly is maintained, or also what we call a lock-in, it tends to create the very, very painful future in terms of how expensive it becomes. And in a database space, we already saw that, right? You can think about Oracle, which started as saving companies from vendor lock-in by IBM. Well, it turned into the creating the huge monopoly for that, not monopoly per se, right, but huge lock-in for the database, and that becoming a very, very expensive solution where for years customers wouldn't have any feasible alternatives. So now, even if you ask, if you're not running database, do such license changes affect me? Well, I think they do, right? Because on first, you or your company may move to database service eventually, but it's also what is very important, what those license change, they really reduce dramatically contribution by community to Redis projects, right? And also there is a reduced number of alternatives which offer enterprise support for Redis, because it's not as attractive to companies to go into that business if they cannot have a cloud. Now here is also an interesting stats. But after the fork happened, somebody did this analysis to see who is actually contributing to Redis. And Redis was quite unique in this regard, where you could see what Redis, when it comes to the Redis core, the Redis company was not even the largest contributor in that code, right? So reality for that was not saying, hey, nobody contributes us. We're carrying the load, right, and everybody else is the freeloaders. No, that was a exactly the power grab, trying to, make sure only Redis, the company, can make money on Redis. And well, it did not really go so well for Redis. There was in this case, a very prompt and serious community response, which exercises their right to fork, which is fundamental for any truly open source solution. Redis was the first fork, and they also switched license to LGPL, and then really just a few weeks later, Volkey came. And Volkey is unique in terms of what it is supported by the Linux Foundation and many other vendors, right? We could see Google Clouds, AWS, Oracle, Huawei, the Alibaba Cloud, the companies which compete dearly in many fronts, right? They are joined forces in making Volkey happen. And yes, Percona is also one of the vendors which sign up for the effort, but obviously they're not anywhere close to the size of other companies which are joined in this case. Now, with that, I think it's very interesting to take a look what happens to the companies with a license change. Here is comparison of OpenSearch and Elastic, where Elastic changed the license to source available and then actually changed it back a few years after. But we could see what the truly community governed fork, OpenSearch, is gaining ground after license change, while Elastic is gradually losing ground. I like also this comparison, right, where we can see Postgres and MongoDB. There, probably the license is not the only difference in this case, but that's one of significant ones where we could see, a little bit after license change, when MongoDB started to lose the ground, while of course, PostgreSQL continues to go up and up and up, and is probably the most used open source database for new developments those days. Here is what we can see with Redis, and it's kind of too early to compare that to Volkey yet, but I think it's very interesting to see what Redis was actually in decline or past its peak for a while. I think kind of roughly after those license shenanigans with models and the commons clause and whatever happened. Okay. Now, after the license change to SSPL, I think what we could see as like, oh shit moments happen, right? I think, and again, I can only speculate here, but this kind of a very severe and unified community action probably, caught Redis by surprise, and they probably heard from a lot of customers about, hey guys, we are going to adopt Volkey. And in this regard, two things happen. First, we can see roughly half a year after a license change, the Antiris, Salvatore Sanfilippo, returned to Redis, right? The details kind of financial arrangements for that deal were not made public, but I think what there was, to me, that's kind of highlights severity of the situation if that is happening. And then probably with his influence, Redis adds back a open source license, but not the most permissive open source license, which is BSD, but the most restrictive open source license, which is AGPL-v3, right? So Redis is backed in open source, but not in a way what it was, not even close. Now, when those changes happened about 2 years ago, I did a poll to see what which of Redis forks, right, or wherever people could look to stay with Redis at that time. And you could see Redis, Valky is winning by a little bit. And then I repeated this poll recently. And I think this is very interesting. What we can see here is what, despite Redis is once again open source, we kind of walk back at least partway where license changes, Valky is still ahead by a lot. And I think a big reason for that is what the trust is broken. And you can actually see community coalition around the Valky, where you can really have a level playing field, what everybody can innovate together, rather than Redis, which is, you know, just run by the single company. Even if that company happened to employ original Redis founder, well, that's not enough. Okay, with that, let's us talk about alternatives now. How to evaluate alternatives? Well, I would suggest those criteria. It's good to think about the license and availability, for example, wherever it's available as database as a service, how it's governed, what is the status of community, how compatible with Redis that is, and also if it's important for you, commercial support offerings, right? Because many companies, they prefer not to just run open source alone, right? So license, this is obvious. With governance, right? Is it a single vendor, like in case of Redis, or is it foundation governance, like with Valky? Again, the single commercial vendors, they can change a license or do other shenanigans, right? For example, Redis may decide now, say, hey, you know what? We tried AGPL-v3, we kind of didn't really get people rushing back to us. So, well, why don't we go back to SSPL or VSL or wherever, right? It is very hard for foundation to do license changes, right? It's very unlikely. So Valky is, the most likely to continue under its existing license. If you speak about community, I would look at both user community, contributor, developer community, as well as a vendor community. And the last one, I think, is very important for a lot of companies who do not want to run open source alone and would do that with a partner. And they want a choice of a partner rather than just saying, hey, there's only one vendor. And, if you don't like them for any reason, well, you don't have any other choice. That's a bad situation to be with. If you think about comparability, comparability is what it is important to you, right? I listed some items here, but the main thing to know about comparability, it's not kind of like a single direction, right? There's like a different things. For some people, comparability of features is the most important. For others, we can say, hey, you know what? We just use the most basic features. That is important for us, but we need to have a performance and scalability, which is at least matches Redis or even larger. Here is the post, another one I did a couple of years ago about some of the most popular Redis models, and I think it's very interesting what a lot of people just use Redis on its own without any models, right? The Redis core itself is very valuable, very powerful. So when it comes to commercial support, we can see what many enterprises don't want to do it alone, as I mentioned, and when you have multiple vendors, that's more choices, less lock-in. And that is where permissive license helps, because that allows vendors to use different models, right? Like, for example, if you look at PostgreSQL with permissive license, you have many companies. Some say, hey, we provide PostgreSQL in the cloud. Some may provide the proprietary forks of Postgres, which we support. Some may provide support for open source Postgres, right? And that creates a large choice of vendors. If you think at Percona, we are one of such vendors. And Percona in this case is interesting because we support both Valky as well as an open source version of Redis. So if you want to run Valky, if you want to run Redis, Percona can help you. If you want to move from Redis to Valky or from Valky to Redis, we can help you either way. With that, we are actually contributing in Valky ecosystem. And why is that? Well, of course, that's much easier because it's open source project. And also that is because Redis provides a level playing field for, Valky provides level playing fields for all contributors. While if you choose to contribute something to Redis, well, we will also have access for our results of our labor on AGPL license, right? Which is not a very good deal. So let's look at the status of a specific alternatives which you have. Now, if you think about alternatives for Redis, there are really two types. There are Redis forks, right, which are based on Redis code base, as well as implementation of Redis protocol, which are not based on the Redis code. So let's talk about what exists out there. First, I think it's worth mentioning Redis, which is the first fork of Redis, which happened just 2 days after announcement of license change, right? And this is a fork which also changed the license to the LGPL, kind of to make sure what all the contributors are, all the changes cannot be then kind of forked back and take proprietary. If you look at the status, it's still being maintained, right? If last release took place in October 2025, and you can see this very much security focused fork. If you say, hey, I'm not really interested so much in the new version, Redis versions, but I just want to make sure I see security features focused, then Redis may be the good choice. And you can see it's still maintained, but that is, I think, right now is not very popular. The fork of Redis is obviously Valky, right? It keeps the BSD license, it has extensive vendor support, including Percona, and it has a lot of contributors. It's interesting, when I did this presentation, I think in July 2024, which is what, 4 months after the Redis fork, it had 76 contributors. Right now, about a year and a half later, we have 836 contributors, right? So this is, just mind-boggling growth for Valky, and that is surely the main Redis fork right now. Another one which I mentioned in that original presentation was called Redka, which is basically Redis implemented on SQLite SQLite backend. It's free closed license, and This is, you can think about that as sort of a prototype slash pilot project. It's not being very actively developed, and that is not probably something you would be using for production. Another one worth mentioning is KeyDB, which was built as a faster Redis alternative. It's now owned by Snap. It was open source, and the latest release is in October 2023, right? So it's kind of not active maintained anymore. Probably the KeyDB team, I'm not sure. Maybe they're working at Snap on other projects, or maybe they have some other internal version of KeyDB we maintain, but that is basically the only thing what we have from KeyDB. Then there is another one called DragonflyDB, right? They call themselves Redis with wings and claim a lot better performance. We have a community and cloud edition, but community edition is not open source. It's sort of an anti-cloud compete VSL version. But again, having said all of that, a lot of users which are not trying to, provide that as a service, they can run Dragonfly DB community version for free, right? Of course, with such a posture, Dragonfly DB doesn't have as broad community or vendor support as Volky or even Redis. Another one to mention is Apache KV Rocks. And what is interesting in this case is it's a distributed key value store with Redis protocol, but it's used RocksDB as a storage engine, right? So it's not in memory, right? But use some very robust and high performance storage. And what is interesting in this case is it's rather actively maintained, not like a Valky, of course, but still has 170 contributors, which, grew by around 30% over the last year and a half. And they just had a last release in February, so it's actively maintained pretty well. Now, another one, which is not a fork, but an implementation, is Microsoft Garnet, which is called the Remote Cache Store from Microsoft Research. It's open source, MIT license. The challenge of that, I think it's implemented in C#, which is not very popular, I would say, programming language for a lot of open source developers. It claims to have better performance in cluster mode, and as I can see, they have done more than 100 releases so far, with latest release just few days ago, right? So that's I would say some niche project, but it's rather interesting and it's ongoing. And another honorary mention would be Amazon's cloud MemoryDB, which they position as durable in-memory database with ultra-fast performance. It is something which is AWS in the cloud only, right? And so that is a very proprietary thing, though it's been available since 2021, and that is one of those sort of in-memory stores technologies with Redis compatibility with Amazon offers right now, right? So they have MemoryDB, Redis, and Valky. So choose your own freedom, right? Up to your choice. And I think with that, we are likely to have more projects which will be released with Redis alternative, because Redis protocol has been very successful and very popular, and a lot of developers love it, which I think is great, because a lot of innovation in open source, they happen with people trying different different things. And especially right now with AI, it becoming increasingly easy to prototype your ideas and to see if they have any legs. With that, I also wanted to highlight one more project, and it's called Open Everest. That is something, the project which is working on a Valky support, and it's a project which allows you to easily manage database in the cloud. So if you are somebody who says, hey, I will want to run Valky as a database as a service, right, but I don't want to be locked in something, then that may be a project to look at. So as a summary, we can see that there is a lot of alternatives coming up to choose from, though Valky is emerged as a reader and it has unprecedented industry support. We can also see what Redis came back to open source, but I think we are yet to see to what extent it can regain the community trust, which it won't have, because that is a very hard to do once it was broken. And with that, that's all I had to say. Thank you.